We all artists here. We all know how that world go.
Yeah, but also we all artists here. We all broke as hell all the time. So like, if you want a free copy, I can give you one.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to Backstage Gaming, dramatic takes on your favorite games. I'm Chris.
And I'm Dylan.
And we have another special episode featuring a guest for y'all this week.
Whoa,
we're
who
super
is that?
excited. We're super excited to have our friend Christine on the show. Christine, say hi.
Hi, everybody. I'm Christine.
Yay, we have Christine.
Woo!
Christine, we've mentioned them before on the podcast. They are the game master and I guess most of the Unexplored Places podcast, which Dylan is appearing in the current or next arc of. The current arc of. It's got there. But Christine, why don't you tell a little bit more about yourself and about what you do and about why you're here?
Oh boy. So I wear a whole bunch of different hats. Like Chris just said, I am the GM of the Unexplored Places. I'm also the GM for about 1 million other games in my own life, including one that I run for work. I get paid to run one, so that's fun.
That's the dream.
That's the dream.
Holy cow.
Yeah, it is.
Except that it's for, like, moody teenagers, but it's fine.
Well, but that's when you get the like Karate Kid-esque redemption, where like you lead them to the heroic climax, and then the moodiest of them all grabs you, and they're like, "You're all right, Previs."
Pretty much, yeah. That's we're almost there. But yeah, in addition to that, I'm also a game designer. I am a former theater person. I was a theater major in college with y'all, but I haven't done theater since.
Fair.
And a video
Same,
game
fan.
Woo. That feels like everything, right?
Yeah, Christine's also a millennial, which means that, like us, we all do everything. We all
Life comes at you fast.
What's stability? But we are going to take this week as sort of an opportunity to chat with Christine about game design and like how building a narrative works, both in the games that they design, but also in running like the mess that is an RPG where players have agency to ruin your stories. And also we're gonna take the opportunity to follow up on the question that Christine asked Dylan specifically in last week's Q&A about the Tales of series.
It's gonna be all about the Tales of series.
And for that part of the podcast, I will be sitting by quietly and listening because I've played 2 of the Tales of games.
Every time we've talked about Tales so far, Dylan and I have gone on for like 4 hours, so who knows what'll happen.
I'm excited.
I'll be watching the clock, so I don't have to edit 4 hours of y'all. I love you very much, but I don't need that. This episode needs to go up in 3 days. But yeah, let's launch in with, for those who haven't listened, Christine, what is Unexplored Places?
So the Unexplored Places is an actual play RPG podcast. Currently, we are using a game called Monster of the Week by Michael Sands, which is a Powered by the Apocalypse game. And right now our plot is about a group of young adult monster hunters in a rural Ohio college town, and a sect of monster hunters who have disguised themselves as a non-denominational Christian youth group. That feels like the best summary I can offer.
I love it. First off, I want to point out that makes 3 podcasts I am aware of, all by Kenyan alumni, and all set in vaguely supernatural small-town Ohio.
Something about small-town Ohio just begs for that kind of content.
Yeah.
Like, Kenyan was haunted as hell. Like, there's nothing...
There was a ghost story for every building in that place.
Phenomenal.
At least.
But yeah, so there's Unexplored Places. There's also the podcast that Dylan and I previously collaborated on with a bunch of our friends, The Magical History of Knox County. And now, as of 2 days ago when we are recording this, there's a podcast out called Unwell, which is also by a Kenyan alum from like 10 years before any of us were there, that I'm in one episode of, that's also about haunted shit happening in small town Ohio. So like, we're part of the brand. We're building
Ohio.
Yeah, Ohio needs zest.
Right now, Ohio is mayonnaise, but
we
can turn it into a nice aioli.
A nice
I think
zesty
Ohio
aioli
is already haunted, and we're just like
We're just giving voice to it.
Processing the things that happened to us there in a way that we will understand by making it about monsters and ghosts and stuff.
I love it. Christine, what's an actual play podcast? I'm taking the role of the audience who doesn't necessarily know what we're talking about.
Well, gee, that's a great question, Chris. So an actual play podcast is basically just a podcast where the audience listens to us play an analog tabletop role-playing game. There are a ton of them. There are like 1 million of them. And thankfully they're edited down a little bit for content, so it's not 3 hours of listening to a bunch of friends joke around at a table, though there's a little bit of that. But for the most part, it's using the tools of the role-playing game systems to tell a collaborative story, and build that together with the people around the table. As opposed to something like a scripted audio drama, in which case the story is generally written by 1 or 2 or a handful of people and then acted out by actors.
Yeah, much more traditional sort of theater or film storytelling in that, as opposed to an actual play where, like, you get a little bit of the mess and you get a little bit of the unexpected.
Yes. Which are my very favorite things, thematically, in real life, in general.
And that's actually kind of the first question I want to ask you, because it's something that, like, we were talking a little bit before we started recording. I really want to get into running an actual play podcast at some point in the future when I'd, like, have more time to devote to it.
Who hasn't?
I mean, it's a good joke, but I guess when you sit down to plan out a story for the Unexplored Places, like whether it is, you know, the big overarching story you want to tell, or specific, like, okay, how am I going to guide this one game session to something resembling a satisfying narrative arc?
Yeah.
What do you do? Like, what is your thought process when you're sitting down to, like, make your plan for this sort of organized chaos that is a game session?
Yeah, so I think there are a couple of things that I generally keep in mind when I'm trying to plan. The first of those is that you can't plan very much. Having 4 to 6 different players who all have their own narrative agendas, who all have their own, like, character ideas, and also who all have their own, like, comedic sense of how can I mess with this to an extent. The amount of planning that I do is minimal, and only the places where it's absolutely crucial. And a huge help with that is that the Monster of the Week, like, GM's guide, has a lot of tools for sort of helping to facilitate that process. So instead of saying, you know, here's what I want to happen, here's what's actually going on in this town, you sort of set out a set of bare minimum, this is what the monster is, this is what can hurt it, this is what it can do, and then this is what it's going to do if the heroes don't interfere.
Okay.
And it's laid out in a sort of countdown format. So there's, like, step 1, the monster's going to do this. If the heroes still haven't interfered, then the monster's going to do this. And you give the monster a motivation. I should have pulled the book up before we started talking. There's a really cool list of types of monsters. I'm going to stall while I pull the PDF up.
No problem. To help you stall,
yes.
You're almost, this is interesting because you're almost doing, like, the work that an actor does in analyzing a script, just without a script.
Yeah, it's a
You're
little
coming
bit of
up
that.
with, you know, rather than when Dylan and I are, like, you know, looking at an audition side and we're trying to find the objective and the tactics that fit the lines, you're coming up with an objective and, like, a series, you know, one could argue that those abilities you're giving it are tactics of a sort, and then using that, you're able to fill in the lines as you need to respond to what the players are doing.
Yeah, it's definitely very similar. So, for example, there are 12 different types of monsters, each with their own motivation. And any monster that you can think of fits into one of these categories. So, one of them is, you know, Beast, whose motivation is to run wild, destroying and killing. One of them is Executioner, whose motivation is to punish the guilty. One of them is Tempter, which is to tempt people into evil deeds. And so you've got this list of monsters and their motivations. And whatever monster you're creating, you fit it into one of those. And that is going to inform what it does when your players get themselves into trouble with it. So for me, it's less about me thinking, here's what the monster's going to do. Here's what the monster's doing. And more saying, here's what this character has done. Here's my, like, list of possible, not even list of possible options, but, like, here's what I know about the monster. So I can very quickly on the spot come up with how it's going to react to that action.
That's super cool.
Okay.
So instead of building out the plot, I build out the world in a way that makes it easy for me to respond to the input I'm getting from the other players.
Okay.
Gotcha.
Which, in a way, means I cede a lot of narrative control over to them, which, in terms of an actual play podcast, where it's a product that people are going to be listening to, it helps immensely that I really trust everyone that I work with.
Right.
As opposed to, like, you know, my Sunday night game of D&D with my coworkers, where it doesn't really matter if they go way off track because everyone's having fun. We're actually creating something that needs to be entertaining and listenable. But
so no party rogues just going off doing whatever.
Yeah.
I mean, see how, like, the two biggest names that I can think of in, like, actual play as an entertainment format. See Critical Role, which is a bunch of voice actors, like, just streaming their whole D&D session, and
they're
the
like
Adventure
6
Zone.
hour long weekly D&D session.
Yeah. And then, like, the Adventure Zone, which is much more of a, like, edited into a story sort of example. Like, both of those are people who have known each other forever. In the case of the Adventure Zone, it's a family, and in the case of Critical Role, it's like friends who have been playing D&D together for years.
Yeah, and that I think is crucial, because when you trust people that way, things like mess and things like failure, there isn't a fear factor around it. There's sort of the idea that we can do whatever, and we can trust the people around us and the people working with us to respond positively to what we're throwing out, and also to take risks in an interesting way. In the same way that when you trust a cast in a theatrical production, you're willing to take those character risks.
I was gonna say that you talking about that got me so excited, because, like, that is that's the dream for an actor. Or for anyone involved in putting together a stage production. Like,
100%. As someone who directed several productions in college, like, that's the dream as a director. You need to trust people.
Yeah, like, so much of being a good actor, like, beyond technique and beyond training and beyond, like, prep work, is the ability to, like, hang your ego at the door and know that, like, you're going into a room and, like, it's gonna be messy for a long time, and if everyone goes in with that mindset and is willing to, like you were just saying, embrace that mess and embrace, like, learning from failure and seeing what failure creates, like, that's the dream.
Yeah. And acting is fun, because you get to do that in a room, and then you get to fine-tune it through a process, and then you get to present it to people.
Yep.
Actual play is fun because you do that in front of a microphone, and then I go and edit, like, everyone saying 1,000 times out, but that's about it.
Yep.
And then the whole internet listens to it.
Yep, I've gotten to the point where I can recognize Dylan's ums and uhs in waveform.
Oh my god.
But
like,
I mean, my own too. I'm not here to put you on blast, Dylan. I do it too, and I know mine too. That's interesting. So your job in, like, turning it into a piece of, like, consumable narrative is just as much on the back end as it is in preparation.
Oh yeah. I mean, the back end is mostly, like, you know, we went off on a tangent joke about a college friend that we all had that no one in the audience is going to understand. I cut that. Or it's like, I'm cutting out the ums and uhs, or the long pause where I have to look up a rule, or the pause before someone rolls the dice. It's less of I'm moving things around so that it sounds like a more cohesive story or anything like that. I do very little content level editing.
Gotcha.
What we say, you know, our discussion of rules tends to stay in, because I like that because play is messy.
It's
and there's something really rewarding about that mess in an environment like that. You know, if someone spends 10 minutes trying to decide which of several moves they're going to take, I might edit that down to 6 minutes, but I'm not going to cut it out to make it sound like a better story.
I think it does help that, you know, because you're trying to... The people listening to the podcast, they're going to know that this is an actual play podcast. So they're not listening to it with, like, tell me a story. Like, I feel like there's a level where, like, they want to be reminded that the people involved are playing a game, and this is something that is being created out of a mutual enjoyment for all these different mechanics and
absolutely
incentives.
Which, in a way, makes moments of story tension and story payoff that much more rewarding.
Oh, absolutely. Like, there are some moments in some episodes coming up that Dylan was there for recording where things pay off so perfectly and so unexpectedly that I could not have even, like, knowing where I wanted the story to go, could not have anticipated the story would actually end up there.
For real, though.
There is nothing more satisfying than that feeling.
I'm really excited to, like, listen to this, like, playback.
I'm excited to hear what people think about it.
You also, Christine, do some just sort of design of your own games. As an example, you recently released a game called 36 Minutes that looks really cool.
Thank you.
I just love, I'm looking at our Discord that we're using to talk right now, and I'm just seeing 36 Minutes, a solo game about dying in space. And talk to me a little bit about the kinds of games you like to make, and also, like, how did this come to be?
Yeah. I guess to talk about this specifically, so this one was written for a very cool game jam on itch called the Emotional Mech Jam, which was a collection of RPGs about mechs or the mecha anime genre or anything sort of related to that was focused, rather than being focused on combat or action like so many games are, was specifically meant to be focused on the emotions involved. And any kind of emotion. It could be grief, it could be love, it could be conflict. If you just search hashtag #SadMechJam on Twitter, you'll find a ton of amazing threads about this jam. There were some incredible games made for this. But what I wanted to do is I wanted to make a one-person game that was just, like, really condensed, like, set kind of time frame. So the way that this game works is that it takes 36 minutes to play, and you have six-sided dice set up in front of you, and you set a timer for a minute, and each time the timer ends, you, like, turn one of the dice over to count down to 0.
Okay.
And for each minute, there's a question prompt that you are supposed to talk about yourself. Imagining that you're in this situation, which is that you are adrift in space, stranded in a broken mech that you cannot fix, and you have 36 minutes left of oxygen.
Whoa.
And so it's the thought process of what are you thinking about as you are facing the sort of inevitable, you can see your life's end point in front of you on a timer, and there's nothing you can do about it, and what are you thinking about in that moment?
That's so cool.
I don't
love this so much.
Want to give too much away, because a couple of my playtesters played it without having read any of the book before they started, and I think that was, like, a really rewarding way to play for them, because some of the questions are kind of unexpected, but it's broken down into 6 sections, one for each of the 6-sided dice, and then each section has 6 questions, one for each side. And the sections are broken down into basically almost the stages of grief.
I'm so down for this.
And so,
like I said this earlier. Go.
No, go ahead.
Like, I said this earlier, but, like, this entire game jam is so damn cool. But, like,
it's incredible.
Fucking game about, like, 30s, like. I watch a lot of mecha anime, and I fucking love the pathos that, like, a lot of people don't talk about. So just the fact that there is a game jam, like, solely dedicated to that.
That's so good.
And there's you made a game about dying in a cockpit. That's so cool.
I highly recommend every game that was submitted for this jam. There were over 100 games, and all of them are amazing.
I have the tag pulled up.
But I'm also pretty fond of mine. But the thing with this game is that I wrote this game in an hour, and other than, like, tweaking the wording here and there in a few places to make sure things that made sense, I kind of, through playtesting and through editing, tried to keep it pretty honest to what I had written in that initial hour of just sort of, like, panicked flood of writing about what I was thinking about this. Because, again, it comes... everything in my life, but specifically also this, comes back to, again, what I was saying about messiness and about sort of the honesty of unexpected things and of messy things and of failed things, which is really, like, my whole ethos, I guess, as a designer, as a player, as a writer, as a theater practitioner back when I was one, is all about, like, the honesty of messiness.
That's so good. And one thing that I don't know how much I've talked about on the podcast, but I haven't been doing so much of this recently, but for a while when I first moved to Chicago, for the first couple of years I lived here, I did a lot of teaching artistry, specifically doing theater and improv camps and, like, after school improv classes with really young kids. Like a lot of my classes were like kindergarten through
Yes.
2nd grade,
Yes.
or like we're talking sort of this perfect age. I loved working especially with the really young kids because they were too young to be shy yet. Like
Yeah.
Oh, that's
when
great.
you're
Yeah.
when you're like 7 years old and you're not yet getting to that point where you care so much what other people think about what you're doing, like those were the most fun kids to work with because they were willing to be messy and to try things. And like in particular, there was a camp that I worked with for a couple summers at the Northlight Theater here in Chicago, and we the camp programs that I worked for all culminated in final performances that would be done for like the parents and families and things like that. But one of them, it was like 2-week camp that was part of it was devising their own show. So we would give the kids like, here's a story or here's a myth or here's like a thing, and now you're going to turn it into your own version that we are going to perform.
I feel like you might have told me some stories from this.
It was really fun, and like a lot of like funny stuff came out of it because, you know, they're creative kids and they're willing to like throw out really absurd jokes.
Yeah.
But it was also amazing watching, because there's a lot of anxiety, even if you're 7 or 8 years old and you don't really have that like self-consciousness yet that we develop in like adolescence.
Yeah.
There's still a lot of fear of like, what if it's not good? And so my job there was really to be like, no, it's okay. It's gonna be messy. It's not gonna work right away. We're gonna have to work at it over and over again, and that's okay. And watching these like kids embrace that was like honestly one of the coolest things I've ever gotten to do working in theater.
Yeah, I was a TA at a theater summer camp for a couple of years, and super similar experience with the like elementary age students, especially in contrast to high school students, whereas like the elementary school students were devising a piece based on like a book that they'd all read, and the high school students were doing a Shakespeare play, and every high schooler was like anxious, like so anxious, like perfecting their lines, you know, really, and so restrained in their ability to like take bold risks because it needed to be perfect. And the elementary schoolers were like jumping all over the place and like trying new things. They'd be like, I didn't think that worked. I'm going to try a totally different thing this time.
I love it.
And it's
I love
like,
it so much.
it's incredible to watch kids work that way. It is so inspiring. And
this
like,
is why arts education needs to be a bigger part of young.
Oh,
like,
yeah.
I could go on a long rant about that. That's not what this podcast is about. But like that, suffice to say, that messiness is beautiful, and I really dig that you emphasize that in the games that you design.
Yeah.
I'm curious about Envoy.
Sure.
I'm just I have your itch page pulled up, and I'm clicking through it.
Thanks.
And I'm very curious about what is Envoy, mostly because the cover caught my eye, and now I'm reading like the blurb, and I'm like, this sounds fascinating.
So Envoy is really fun because I wrote it for everything that I've published right now, because all of my other projects are too big to ever finish at the moment. So they're all like really small scale.
That's a real mood.
I really want to see your Neo Yokio game.
Oh, it's happening. I need a lot of time. And I have not had much lately. But so a lot of what I've been doing is written specifically for jams or other smaller scale things. Envoy was written for a yearly challenge called the 200-word RPG challenge, which is write the rules of an RPG in only 200 words, plain text, no formatting. This? Oh, it's incredible. 200wordrpg.github.io, and they get like hundreds of entries a year, and it's like zero formatting, zero like just like so bare bones. And so I wrote Envoy because I just read Ursula Le Guin's Left Hand of Darkness. And the like setup of the game is that one person is the envoy, so it's like a human who's been sent to this alien culture to learn about it and then report back to to Earth, as it were. And the game works by that person asking in turn each other person questions about their culture. But each different representative of that culture has their own agendas and has their own opinions. And so they can use their turns to, give the envoy gifts in order to gain more influence, or bribe players into agreeing with them about how they see the world, or like undermine something that someone else said, so that the information the envoy is getting about this culture that's being created is like not just information, it's like super biased, agenda-driven information based on like the like cultural value that each person sitting around the table happens to have at that moment.
Oh my goodness. This is this is gonna be the Dylan gushes about all these cool games you're making now.
Yeah, this is super cool.
Thank you.
I'm thinking about the possibilities right now, but I'm like, shit, I gotta do a podcast.
This game is just the act of devising.
Pretty much, yeah.
This game is just devising a story in a much more fluid way, and that's really cool.
This is collaborative world building in a competitive way.
Yes, exactly. That's exactly what it is.
Oh my goodness. Why is this so good?
So powerful.
If anyone wants, you can get most of these for pay what you want on cprevis.itch.io.
There it is.
There's the plug. Definitely check this shit out, y'all.
I was just gonna say real quick that I'm noticing a trend here where like a lot of your games, the mechanics and rules are asking the players to seriously consider about like who they are playing and like what they're. And I was thinking back to Unexplored Places with my character Cassandra, and how one of their abilities you had was like I talk to spirits for divine information,
which is so cool.
But they have to ask me a question in return, and every time you did that to me, I'm like, well, shit. Now I got to make a strong character choice.
Yep.
But like, you know, not like, oh man, that Christine, they really have it out for me, but more like, oh, well, now I have to commit even harder.
And like, wow, I really have to think about this character's like mind space. When I was directing in college, we had a catchphrase for the productions I directed, which was, we would always joke, you know, there's sort of the saying, strong choice, wrong choice.
Yeah.
Our saying was bold choice, gold choice.
Yep.
And that is something I fully stand by in all of my gameplay, all of my game design. Is like, just make the bold choice and it's going to be great.
I was in at least one of your shows, wasn't I?
I am not sure you were. Dylan was in...
I was in one that you directed. I was in
and
Bear,
then you were in the one that I wrote as well.
Yeah.
Were you involved in Urinetown, or am I remembering that completely
stage managed Urinetown.
That's what I'm thinking of. Because I had a small part in Urinetown.
A little bit of my influence, but not as much as the other stuff I did. I do feel like the production of Rocky Horror that I directed in college is like my treatise on messiness.
Good.
That is like
so good.
what has become my entire like you know,
your MO.
Yeah, my whole MO as an artist, basically.
I love it. That feels like as good a point as any to transition into what will probably be the other half of the episode, in which Dylan and Christine gush about a game series they love, and I serve as audience stand-in. So, Dylan, tell me about the Tales series.
All right.
We talked a little bit about them a couple weeks ago, but
about the Tales series. Yes, the moment you've been waiting for. As well
my whole life, I've been preparing for this.
I'm just imagining you at age like 13 just playing, I don't know, Tales of Symphonia. Like, someday I'll be on a podcast where they ask me
and
about
I'll
this.
Talk about...
Podcast didn't even exist yet. I was like, someday.
I'll talk about Lord Yggdrasil's Age of Lifeless Beings.
Yep.
Oh my goodness.
I was thinking about...
What do these words mean? Because that means nothing to me.
I have strong opinions about the political tensions between Tethayala and Silverant, okay?
The audience wants to know what the fuck you mean.
Oh man, I have a couple friends who will love this segment of the episode. Okay, so as I think I probably said last week, the Tales series is a series of RPGs that started around 1996. I want to say by Namco, the developer Namco. And I could go on about like a lot of the minutia, but I think the big part is they are one of the larger JRPG series, and they've always had a reputation for like the characters don't like at first glance they are like very, I don't want to say generic, but they are very stock characters. And one of the things that like made this series so notable, especially with like its very devoted but small fan base in the West until recently, was that they are stock characters that have just a lot of dialogue to the point where like they get very fleshed out and kind of grow outside of those stock roles. I don't know if you want to add anything, Christine.
Yeah, just half of the game functions as these like skits between the characters that you watch where they just talk to each other about whatever is happening, and like gameplay pauses and you sit there and you watch these characters talk to each other, and it's like
so good.
It's so weird coming from playing things like, I don't know, the other games I was playing when I was in middle school, when I started playing these games like Mario or whatever, to have these characters just like, it's like I'm watching a TV show and then, oh, that's finished, I'm gonna go back to fighting monsters.
I remember when I was, God, I want to say I was in 3rd or 4th grade, and Tales of Symphonia was the cover issue of Nintendo Power. And I was reading through this issue of Nintendo Power, and they were talking about how, because like up until that point, like the defining fantasy game of my youth was Ocarina of Time. But I was reading about Tales of Symphonia, and they were talking about how like there's a system where like you can assign different party members to cook different meals for you, and that gives you different benefits. And there are these things called skits, like Christine was saying, where you know, something could just happen. You could talk to an NPC and that could trigger a skit. And it kind of turned video games for me like from a genre where there are these virtual spaces you can explore. Like for me, like I really loved Zelda and Pokemon, where I could just explore these towns, and it added an extra layer of character and personality to it, where, you know, as a kid I was like, wow, it's like a show on Toonami that you can play. But like really it's kind of like that. You kind of feel like you're watching a show as you're playing the game, just through virtue of all of the interesting dialogue you can discover.
Yeah, it also helps that I assume, like most JRPGs, the plots are so incredibly complex, and also these are like 30 to 60 hour games. And like everything takes like a wild turn where you least expect it to. So that also, compared to, you know, Zelda, is the plots are fairly straightforward, generally speaking. Whereas with this, it's like, first you're like going on a mission for like the world's, they've incredibly developed mythologies that are totally different from one game to the next. But like the like general form is like, you're on some sort of mission to do one thing, and you know that the world is this way, and then you get a third of the way through the game, and suddenly your entire worldview is turned on its head because you find out a piece of information that like the entire public has been lied to by this big form of power. And then all of a sudden your mission is like totally reversed from what it was at the beginning of the game, and everyone betrays everyone.
So I'm excited, like, so let's just jump right into
soap opera levels of drama. Oh my god.
So it's almost like they use these conversations, they use these like breaks in the action to just watch people have a conversation as a way of grounding the story and the characters.
Absolutely.
Because otherwise the story is this big, I don't want to say incomprehensible, because like I have not played as many of these games, and that has a lot of more negative connotation than I mean. They use this to keep the story centered on these characters, even as outside of it maybe it's getting too big for that kind of intimacy.
Absolutely. Even when these like world scale plots.
That's so smart, and I love that, and I wish more games did it.
I will say, like, you know, some of my favorite games from other genres, like Final Fantasy VII, has one of my, I wouldn't say favorite stories ever, but like I think it does a lot of really neat things. I think the characters kind of get lost in the scale of the world, and it, by the end of the game, it's really only focusing on one or two of the cast. Tales of Symphonia, when you get to the end, or not just Tales of Symphonia, most Tales games, like when you get to the end, you feel like every character like has an arc that has carried through from beginning to end.
Yes. And everything is so intensely personal to each of the like 8 or 9 different characters in your party by the end of the game.
Yeah.
This honestly reminds me a lot of just to throw a parallel out there, the one of my favorite games for the GameCube, Fire Emblem Path of Radiance.
Yeah.
In which the Fire Emblem games have a system that is referred to in the game as support, in which you can like designate a couple of characters as like having a relationship that translates to better stats on the battlefield.
Yeah. When they are in close proximity, they will fight better.
Yeah. But in Path of Radiance in particular, when you like cause characters to support one another in like the between mission screen, that takes the form of like a brief conversation between the two of them. And like as you progress the same support relationship further and further, there's like actually a story built into those like 3 or 4 conversations that you can watch. And it's like in the middle of this like continent-spanning war that is the focus of the story, you can have these little, like, 2, 3, 4 minute at a time snippets of, like, these two characters, one of whom is, like, comforting the other on the fact that he's far away from his kid or something like that. And it's, like, this great way of just bringing the humanity back into the story.
I'll get back to Tales real quick, but I think you would appreciate this, Chris. In one of the Fire Emblems for the Game Boy Advance, there is a character who has amnesia, but, like, you know, when he joins your party, he has, like, maybe 2 lines of dialogue and doesn't say anything. His entire backstory, his relationships, like, with his best friend and his sister, are all completely revealed only through the support conversations.
I adore it. That's so cool.
Amazing.
So good.
Anyway, that was the parallel that I noticed about a game that I can actually talk about. Back to the action.
No, it's all good. I played a shit ton of Symphonia and Path of Radiance back in middle school, so I can talk about both. But anyway, right. So I guess, like, we were going to talk about, like, the stories of various Tales games and kind of compare them to different playwrights or, you know, thematic gravitas.
Yeah.
Because we've been mentioning Symphonia, and we started with Silverant and Tetheala, like, you know, everyone knows what the hell we're talking about. I guess we should jump to Tales of Symphonia.
Yeah, let's go with that. Symphonia was my introduction to the Tales series at, like, a very critical time in my life. Yeah. So I will always hold a deep fondness for it.
So,
what's Tales of Symphonia, guys?
Here's another important thing. Okay, so Tales of Symphonia was an RPG that was released for the Nintendo GameCube back in, like, the early to mid 2000s. And the basic premise of the game is that you are Lloyd Irving. You're pretty much an average dude in medieval fantasy land. And, you know, your friend it's been known for a while, like, since her birth, your friend Colette, she is designated as the Chosen of Regeneration. So what that means is that by holy commandment?
Holy proclamation.
Sure. Thank you. Holy proclamation. She is destined to basically go on a pilgrimage to become an angel and save the world. Yes. A lot of stuff happens. As the Chosen of Regeneration, that is her title, her progress is impeded by a group of half-elves called Desians, and they don't want the world to be regenerated for some reason. And, you know, it's a very basic premise that, like, just by the end of the first act spins wildly out of control.
So much. I mean, are we going? We have to go into spoiler territory, basically.
We do.
Spoilers for Tales of Symphonia.
The game is old.
The game is almost as old as we are, and yet, there's a character who tries to stop you, and she's like a weird, mysterious ninja, and she's trying to kill Colette. And then you, like, get in a situation where you actually talk to her, and she's like, yeah, so your world, Silverant, lives in parallel to my world, Tetheala, a totally different world. And when your world gets regenerated, ours gets fucked up.
You're actually stealing all of the life from our world. These two worlds are actually sharing lifeblood, and so each one has their own chosen.
And it just, like, passes back and forth between them like an hourglass. And the act of regeneration is what, like, brings it into the other world. And you get, like, shot out of a cannon into this other parallel world, and then you, like, go all over Tetheala, meeting people from there, and trying to figure out a way to save both of the worlds.
And then on top of this, the whole, like, Chosen of Regeneration, you become a angel to save the world. Like, that's a half-truth. Turns out, like, all of the angels that have been guiding you on your pilgrimage are keeping a lot of secrets from you, and, you know, they're also kind of fucking you over.
Yeah, you become, like, a husk of a person who has given their entire being to this cause.
You're supposed to be a vessel for their goddess.
Yep.
I see.
And so, yeah, there's a lot of stuff that's happening. It's revealed over the course of, like, some 40 hours, so it's not as much of a drop after drop after drop.
Right.
And, of course, split up nicely by, like, dungeon puzzles and, like, big fighting dragon battles and, you know.
Thankfully, this game does have a synopsis that you can open at any time to be like, all right, what the fuck just
happened? What just happened? What's going on? Where was I again?
But you see why it's so important to have those character moments and that ability to just, like, see a bit of a human story for a minute.
Yeah, if you didn't care about Colette losing her sense of self. And, like, you're her best friend who's supposed to be helping her. Like, if you didn't care about these things, the story would be meaningless.
Yeah, like, there's a lot of stuff going on, but, like, I think what makes these games work is that, like, it doesn't focus on that too hard. It tries to keep it down. Like, you know, there's Lloyd. What does he want to do? He wants to find a way to help everybody. So that includes the parallel world that, you know, will be doomed if we save our world. He wants to help. There's even more stuff to spoil, and so, like, I'm trying not to get there.
So now
we could do a 3-hour episode just on this one game.
We could,
to serve as the guide and to serve as sort of the shepherd of this podcast that I have to edit later.
Yeah.
So no, I mean, I'm gonna move on. Don't worry.
I was gonna throw out as possibly a thing for discussion.
Mm-hmm.
Christine asked last week in our Q&A episode what playwright Dylan would compare the Tales games to in terms of, like, general theming and, like, works as a whole. And Dylan seemed to be of the mind that would be very difficult to do because the Tales games were not all made by one person, which, like,
yes,
of course not.
Yeah.
But for you guys, is there a playwright or perhaps a work of either theater or filmmaking that you feel like is similar in theming or in, like, the way that it presents itself to Tales of Symphonia?
I feel like there are, like, 6 different answers, and they're all wrong in different ways. I'm like, in terms of complexity and scale, Kushner, maybe? In terms of, like, the number of characters being juggled and, like, the intense personal dramas, like, Miller, maybe?
Miller or, like, Chekhov?
Chekhov,
like a big Chekhov play?
Thematically...
Yeah, Chekhov in some ways.
Thematically is harder. Dylan, you mentioned this while we were getting ready, but,
yeah.
So
each Tales
game has a different, like, what's
they
called
are
a central
characteristic
theme.
genres.
Characteristic genres, that's the phrase.
Tell me more, because y'all said this before we started recording. I said, I made a Tim Allen noise, and then y'all were like, we'll get there.
Okay, so what the characteristic genres are is, for, like, I don't know if it's, like, a marketing thing or what, but Namco, whenever they release a Tales game, they release a subheading where it's like, it is this kind of RPG. It is this genre of RPG.
Okay.
And it's really, I think it's their way of marketing it and this is only in Japan, by the way. They don't advertise them like this in America.
And I don't think they've done it with the more recent games. But they certainly did it. I'm looking at the Wikipedia page for Berseria right now, which is the one I just finished.
It says RPG of discovering your own reasons to live.
Oh, that makes sense.
I would argue is the purpose of Tales of the Abyss, but whatever.
Well, no, Tales of the Abysses is more accurate, like more specifically. Tales of the Abysses is to know the meaning of one's birth RPG.
Yeah,
which is
so like stuff like that. So Tales of Symphonia.
So by genre, you mean existential question.
Exactly.
Yeah, exactly. Tales of Symphonia is RPG that resonates with you. Haha, symphony, get it?
No.
But like a huge theme, and I think this is kind of what solidifies like all of the weird, disparate, world-ending crises that are happening in Tales of Symphonia, is that like, at the end of the day, like, thematically, the thing that is tying all of these things together is that the success of one group of people leads to the suffering or the torment of another. So you have, if Silverant is saved, Tethe'ala will start to die. There are half-elves that are facing, like, a huge theme of Tales of Symphonia is that there are half-elves who are persecuted, and the main villain is actually a half-elf who wants to kind of end it by taking away people's free thought, which, like, I know we're just spoiling the whole game, but yeah, it's been out for a while, so I'm not too worried about that. And it's hard, because I'm trying to think of, like, every possible angle I can play this, and I know that, like, at the end of the day, I'm gonna have to just kind of drop it and move on. Because, just, you know, despite all of, like, the crazy stakes and crazy things happening in the story, the fact that, like, they built all of this around one theme that they slapped on the cover of the box in Japan, at least, is a really cool thing. And I know we were talking about playwrights, but I thought, like, I should throw that in at some point.
Yeah, well, in that respect, it's almost like, thematically, because each game has a different central theme that way, we could either say that a playwright who does some sort of moral play would be comparable, or we could say that, like, each different one of these quote-unquote characteristic genres lends itself to the work of a different playwright. So Tales of Berseria, you mentioned its characteristic genre is RPG of discovering your own reasons to live. And what that means is, like, I just finished...
so much.
I just finished beating this game, like, half an hour before we started recording. So I'm worked up about it. But, like, basically each character, through the course of their own, like, subplot within the main plot, they're all about, like, you know, one of the characters is, like, a pirate, and his whole thing is, like, you have to steer your own ship. You have to be the hands on the wheel of the ship of your own fate. And, like, the main character is on this, like years-long journey of vengeance that she discovers partway through the game is, like, all for naught. Like, because everything that she's been basing this vengeance on is not true, and she has to try to figure out what it means to live her life without that driving force anymore. So each of these characters, like, has that different journey of figuring out what they're living for, and what they were living for, and, like, how they adjust that around this changing view of the world, I guess. I was going somewhere with that. I've been thoroughly distracted. I was going to compare that to a playwright whose work is about, quote-unquote, discovering your own reasons to live, and I don't remember who it was anymore. It was going to be, like, it wasn't Sarah Rule, but it was, like, one of the, like, Sarah Rule-esque.
Oh,
maybe it was...
Is it the guy I hate?
Probably not.
No, he's not a bad
I don't talk about men a lot, so probably not.
That's fair. Who's the jerkwad who wrote, like, Reasons to be Pretty and Forest Dark and Deep and...
Oh, I don't know his name.
I mean, that's
LaBute, Neil LaBute.
Yeah, I also don't like him. Was it Annie Baker? It might have been Annie Baker that I was thinking of.
Oh, what plays? I know that name.
The Flick,
I can't...
Circle Mirror Transformation.
The Flick is so good.
I think specifically I was thinking about The Aliens, which is this play about, like, 17-year-old kid who, like, stumbles across these two weirdos who hang out in the back patio of a coffee shop, slacking their lives off and, like, playing guitar and, like, smoking and talking shit.
That sounds like the Tales of Berseria cast from what little I know of them.
I mean, basically. But, like, the whole play is, like, him trying to figure out what, like, growing up means, and, like, trying to orient as he's becoming an adult, trying to figure out who he is, and these two guys with these, like, experiences that are so vastly different from his own, like, influencing, and not, like, I don't want to say influencing as in he takes on their worldviews, but, like, I guess challenging the things that he knows and helping him sort of figure out who he is that way, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
It's one of my favorite plays. I absolutely love it. And, like, not something that I ever would have looked at. It's like a one set, like, 3 people, like, super stripped down, very basic play. Not something I ever would have thought to be like, that reminds me of one of the Tales of games. And yet, like, that central theme is like, the heart of it is sort of there in the way that the Tales games are so rooted in the dynamics between the characters and the way that their differing objectives and worldviews push against one another and influence one another.
Yeah. I mean, the Flick is also a really good example of that because it's about these 3 people who have, like, nothing in common that learn to be around each other in the course in order to do the job that they need to do, which is running this movie theater.
Yes.
The Flick is a great play. Go read The Flick, anyone out there who, like, wants just a really good small cast play.
Any of Annie Baker's plays, honestly.
Oh, yeah.
She's one of my favorite playwrights. But yeah, it's the same. I mean, the Tales of characters aren't even all, like, they're working towards a common goal for very different reasons.
I was actually about to say, Tales is really cool because while one Final Fantasy game did do this first, I think I'll get to that in a second. The Tales games are really cool in that, like, since Tales of Destiny, which I think came out in 1997.
That sounds right.
All these characters are pursuing a mutual goal, except plot twist, no, they aren't. And, you know, occasionally you will have a party member, and this is a Tales tradition, where you will have a party member that betrays the party and starts actively working against them.
By the second playthrough, you always remember to take all the good gear off of them before the cutscene where they betray you forever.
But, you know, other games have done this since, but I think, like, Tales really kind of started it. You could argue that Final Fantasy IV in 1992 did that, but that character who betrays you did so because he was brainwashed. So
that
I
doesn't
don't think
count.
that counts.
That doesn't count the same way.
It's less impactful
again,
if it doesn't
alert.
come from their own agency.
Exactly.
Yeah. It doesn't have the same impact as when, spoiler alert, Kratos in Tales of Symphonia betrays you, and also you find out he's your dad.
He's your dad! I've been replaying the game with a friend, and I just got to that scene, and I'm like, yeah, it's still good.
Yep, still good every time.
I'm gonna need to play these games.
You do. And again, they're like a commitment. They're like 40-hour games.
They are long-ass games.
They are so worth it.
Play them on easy mode.
Yes.
I won't tell anyone, but I'm gonna say a couple things, and I really wanted to talk about Tales of the Abyss before we left, but I don't know if Chris will let me.
No, that's fine.
Anywho,
I would kill to talk about Tales of the Abyss.
Oh, yay!
Oh, it's gonna be it'll be a long episode. That's fine.
I love you, Chris.
I love you too, Chris.
So
keep it as concise as you can so that my editing brain doesn't die.
Of course.
Because I also work every day between now and when the episode launches.
As an editor, I know the feeling.
Anyway.
Talk to me about the Abyss.
Oh, God, I was going to say something about Kratos before we moved on, though. He betrays you. He's your dad.
Same.
Yeah. Okay, so when I posted you when I sent to you the video of Cam Clark, voice of Kratos, doing the reading poetry for Valentine's Day, because that's an actual goddamn thing that happened, Chris.
Oh, so good.
What?
Yeah, I texted back my friend who sent me that. Oh, that's great. In celebration of Kratos reading me poetry for Valentine's Day, we're gonna kill Zelos. And that is a joke that is only for Christine and anyone else who's played Tales of Symphonia.
Oh, I've played that game 4 times now, and every time I'm like, who did I kill last time? I have to make sure I'm fair. They're both my favorite characters.
There is a critical moment in Tales of Symphonia where you have the choice of, because the characters Kratos and the characters Zelos are both basically the same type of character. They're both swordsmen who cast magic. You have the choice of having one of them on your team, but if Kratos joins your team, Zelos will betray you, and you have to kill him in a boss fight.
Yep.
Now that we've completely spoiled every twist in Tales of Symphonia,
go play
Chris,
the game.
Go play it.
Let's talk about Tales of the Abyss.
Yeah. So, hot take. As much as I just talked about how Tales of Symphonia is my favorite game ever, Tales of the Abyss is my favorite Tales game.
You just shot me in the heart with Cupid's arrow, because I fucking agree with you and I love it.
I realized the other day as I was like thinking about this for this episode that Tales of the Abyss inspired one of the major plot points that's just been revealed on the Unexplored Places, which I don't want to spoil
really?
in case any of your listeners have not, so I'm just going to type it in the chat here.
Okay. I almost spoiled it, so I'm glad you said something.
Hold on. Well, I'll say vaguely, ever since I played this game, I have been low-key obsessed with characters who don't know who they actually are, is what I can say without spoiling either of them, I guess.
Rad.
Well, we'll talk about Tales of the Abyss briefly, because I don't want to spend too much time. I just want to say real quick that it is, and I've tried to tell other people this who've played Abyss and like can't really get past the main character's attitude. It is impressive to me that when I was 12 or 14 years old, I beat Tales of the Abyss, did the New Game Plus, and the second Luke, the main character, has his first line, I'm like, oh, right, we're back to this.
Yep, he changes so drastically from beginning to end of that game.
All right, but anyway, to clue Chris in really quick, I'm sorry.
Yeah. As the audience, I'm lost in turning off the podcast right now.
No, don't turn off the podcast!
Tales of the Abyss is about... Okay, so in Tales of the Abyss, everything is preordained by a prophecy. I think I touched on that briefly last week. Everything is preordained by a prophecy known as the score.
Like we did talk about this last week.
And so that the world's kind of dictated by that. But the main character, Luke von Fabre is his full name. When you're introduced to him, he's a young man who really only remembers the last 7 years of his life. When he was a tween, he was kidnapped, and when he's returned, he has no memories. And so his parents kind of coddled him, and so he lives a very sheltered life, so he is very spoiled. And
he's
very
a total brat.
Entitled.
He's an absolute brat.
He is the worst. And so you play a lot of the game, an inciting incident happens, people do this, that, and so it is actually learned that Luke, the reason why he doesn't have any memories is not because he has amnesia. He is actually a clone of another character, who, that was the original Luke that was kidnapped. And the Luke that we've been playing as is a copy that was sent to
replace him,
or
basically.
Less, yeah, like he's kind of like, I don't want to say a sleeper agent, but he is
like a body snatcher type, like a pod person.
Yeah,
he is a pod person.
Okay,
exactly. And so his existence was not preordained in the score. So by all means,
so he disproves God
by the scriptures of his. Well, he doesn't disprove God. When he fucking completely erases the prophecy, God comes out and congratulates him at the end of the game. But
so to quote Brian David Gilbert's video about how all Sonic games are heretical, either he is a god or he could kill God, and I do not care if there is a difference.
Exactly. God, I love these games.
They're so good. But yeah, no. So the characteristic genre title of Tales of the Abyss is Discovering the Meaning of Life RPG, or I think originally was like knowing the meaning of one's birth.
Wikipedia says to know the meaning of one's birth RPG.
Yeah.
Oh my god.
I'm on the official Tales wiki.
I can hear you pushing your glasses up your nose.
Good, because I did motion that.
And I could see the anime glasses flash through the audio interface that we are using.
But yeah, so I wanted to bring up Tales of the Abyss because my favorite thing about it is the main character, Luke von Fabra. I could talk about the rest of the cast, but for sake of brevity, and because I love you, Chris, I will not. It's really funny, or not funny, but like it's really interesting because you kind of, this character goes from a transformation of, being entitled and not thinking critically about anything to thinking
God.
that like he has a very specific purpose, because at that point he still believes that he is the original Luke von Fabra, to having a complete existential crisis, thinking that like, because he's like, oh man, I stole the original Luke's life, what am I? Do I even have my own agency? And the end of the game is he's talking to the final boss who created him, and he's like, I don't care what you think about me, I'm here for myself, I am alive right now, and that's all I need to do.
Oh, that's rad.
It is such a complete character arc, because it's not like the incident happens and then boom, he is changed. He actually has to struggle to change. He has to struggle to like change his preconceptions of like what he can do and who he is. And I fucking love it.
Yeah.
That's so
and
cool.
I wish I could compare this to like any other character, but
I want to jump in here because this is not a playwright. I'm gonna get a little bit loose on the question, but there is a theater company here in Chicago called Looking Glass Theater.
Yes.
They are, if they are known outside of Chicago, it is for some of the plays that they have helped to create. There's a playwright named Mary Zimmerman who is famous for doing adaptations of works of myth or works of folklore. She's done really cool adaptations of like the Arabian Nights. She did an adaptation of the Metamorphoses, and Looking Glass is where she does a lot of like the first stagings of these shows. But they are very into devised theater. I don't think I've ever seen them put up a show that wasn't in some way like, we did our own thing with this, and we like as a company created the version of this show that you are going to see, to the extent that they will go so far as to like completely rebuild the interior of their theater space for every show to change the audience's means of like consuming the theater. I saw one production there that was about vaudeville, like it was about a vaudeville show and about a pair of vaudevillian performers, and they turned the theater space into like a cabaret with like table seating. Okay. And the play happened both on stage and around the tables. And like the way that you're talking about this sort of like grand concept for each of the Tales games, that what was the term? The characteristic
genre, yeah.
Puts me in mind of the way that Looking Glass approaches their shows, of like, we know the kind of story we want to tell and we know how we want the audience to feel, and now let's do everything we can to create that. Not just in the performance, not just in the like play itself, but in the staging and in the way that you are interacting with it. And they're one of my favorite theater companies. I would love to work with them one day because, like, big dreams. But like that feels very similar to at least how you are describing the way that the Tales games sort of present their ideas.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm completely off base.
No, I can see it.
haven't played many of these games.
I see what you're talking about. It's actually kind of funny because, like, when I'm looking at like some of the earlier characteristic genre titles, it's like Tales of Fantasia, Legendary RPG, Tales of Destiny, Fateful RPG.
They phoned those in.
Yeah, but like I think it's because they didn't come up with that until much later. But like,
right.
I think, the later ones, as like the series kind of etched out more of its own identity, they want you to look at these stories and these characters and the trials and tribulations that these characters are going through and think about like what that struggle means to you, more so than like these two worlds are in alignment and if one succeeds the other fails. Like, that's fun and that adds to the drama and the stakes of the narrative. But I think what makes these games special for a lot of people is that like they are very personal and they market themselves as such.
That's really cool. And that also feels like a very nice coda at which
I think so too.
To wrap this episode up. Thank you everyone for listening to this week's episode of Backstage Gaming, and thank you to Christine for joining us. Christine, where can people find your stuff so that they can consume more of your media?
Absolutely. You can find me on Twitter at cprevis. You can find my podcast, The Unexplored Places, on Twitter at unexploredcast or unexploredcast.tumblr.com. And you can find the games that I make at cprevis.itch.io.
Thank you. Everyone should go click on at least one of those links.
You heard me gush.
Yeah.
Like, I don't get excited about everything.
Arguable.
I know. I know. Shut up.
But thank you again, Christine, for joining us. It was super fun.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Yeah, no problem.
And thank you, audience, for joining us for this week. We hope you enjoyed yourself. As always, we've been Backstage Gaming. You can find us at bsgpod.com. There we have bios for me and Dylan. We've got a contact page. We've got all of our episodes available for download direct from the podcast source. And we're also on a bunch of social media platforms that Dylan's going to tell you about right now.
Always. So, you can check us out on Facebook. You can find our Twitter at BSG_cast. That's our handle. You can find us on YouTube. And if you like what we're putting down, you can talk about us with hashtag BSGpod. Also, if you like the character artwork that we use for our thumbnail, our header image, all that good stuff.
The only image we own.
Yeah, the only image we own. We got to commission more art, pay your artists. That was done for us by our friend Brendan French. If you like that artwork, you can check him out at his Squarespace, brendanfrench.squarespace.com. That is BRENNEN-French.squarespace.com. He also has an Instagram, which we really need to add to this page, but whatever.
Brendan French Arts.
There it is, Brendan French Arts at
or
Instagram.
on Instagram.
On Instagram, thank you.
You should also go check out our friend BioQuery. He is the musician behind our theme song Dot Sound Radio Volume 1 Instrumentality. He's also just a really cool musician in his own right, and he has recently released a new EP titled Posthuman Angst that is like an absolute banger, and I've been listening to it on my runs recently. Like, it's really cool and very strange. But that is available on wherever you get your music. So Apple Music, Spotify, Napster? Is Napster still a thing? I don't know why I suggested Napster. Download Posthuman Angst to your Zune.
Oh my god.
But you can also find him at his SoundCloud, which is soundcloud.com/bioquery. That's soundcloud.com/BIOQUERY. And check out Unexplored Places to hear some Dylan. Check out Unwell, a Midwestern Gothic mystery, which just released episode 2 today, Thursday the 21st that we're recording this. If you stick through that all the way to the end, you get to hear me scream a lot. So that'll be fun. And
I can't
as
wait.
always, thank you so much for tuning in. We hope you enjoyed yourself, and we'll talk to you next week.
Bye.
Goodbye.